Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramos and I'm very pleased to say my guest today is Amilcar Sanatan, who is a researcher at the igds, the Institute of Gender Development Studies. Welcome to the program, Amilcar.
Thank you very much.
Which I now know is a name of someone associated with Hannibal, which is interesting.
Yes.
Because I'd never seen the name before, to be perfectly honest. Well, we've had a few people on from the igds, and I learn something new every single time we have someone on, and I get a different perspective, which I guess is the point of the igds, isn't it? To examine issues that don't necessarily always get examined thoroughly in our society.
Of course.
Now, you're working on your PhD?
Well, my MPhil.
Your MPhil, sorry. And I guess ultimately...
En route to PhD.
En route. But I know you wanted to come on and talk about men, and particularly men as it relates to domestic violence. Have you done a lot of work in that area?
Not specifically, but at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, we engage groups who do work with what we would call men's work. I'm also a volunteer and member at the CARIMAN, the Caribbean Male Action Network, who has mandate of first looking at men as it relates to health issues, men as caregivers, and men against gender-based violence. Now we look at domestic violence or gender-based violence. The first things we often look at, because the contribution of the feminist movement, we see violence against women or violence that affects women disproportionately. And the culture of silence and the culture of violence which emerges from this phenomenon in the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago is not alone. But we see there's a culture of silence among men who experience violence as well. There's a culture of silence among young boys who experience child sexual abuse. So we have low reporting rates for both men, women, boys and girls. But imagine the reporting rate for boys who are emasculated as they experience violence. And further for LGBTI groups who have no form of ability to go to the police and make a report and have the same due process.
There is still limited protection.
Of course.
Legally. So you mentioned the Caribbean there, and we are sort of a unique case in that sense, are we? I mean, when you look at the dimension of the problem and the way we react to it and the way that people feel empowered to speak out against things, is the Caribbean a specific case in itself?
Not specific case. There are global trends where there are inequality in pay between women and men, but there are also inequality in terms of what people will try to develop by indicators of empowerment. And the Caribbean, I think there's the big word we would use, idiosyncrasies in the way it was formed or manifests itself, which has something to do with our colonial history, which talks about slavery, which talks about indentureship, which talks about the decimation of First Nation peoples. So we have a very sociological, historical approach to understand our realities, and at the igds, that's what we teach too. So historians could have a part to play in our movement.
And I guess it's important then to understand the background, but in understanding the background, does that help us to in some way mitigate or solve the problems?
Most definitely. One of the things that we also do is engage in popular culture debates. Many young girls look up to Rihanna, and that's something I love to do. I study popular culture in particular, look up to Rihanna, and I love her music as well. In fact, I attended Combermere School, the school that she attended, right?
Really? Okay.
So her name was Robin Fenty, so which are her friends then, because she'll probably not add me back on Facebook now. But beyond that, we have Rihanna, but look at the abuse that she faced with her and Chris Brown that was in the public, where we had even young men and young women saying that, well, she looked for the blame game. Victim blaming and not looking at the abuse. Many young people experience violence in their relationships. Now we have a public anxiety to the camera phone technology, which puts it in the public domain for public discussion. But this existed a long time in Trinidad and Tobago. The question is, how do we make an intervention? So for example, young people on social media, we need to have programs for young people to manage their identities online. But there's a type of violence that could exist there, but we call camera phone pornography. We saw in the papers published this week that there's an increase in terms of the availability of child pornography online. But also young boys and girls have sex and share that video. Is it that these young girls always come from damaged homes? Is it that the boy and the girl is a broken child? Or do we really blame the girl and not the boy? So there are different social consequences which may raise questions about, is there legislation to defend these young people? Is there legislation around cyber pornography and child pornography, or what we call revenge pornography, after a boy and a girl may break up and someone does it, or we say for spite in Trinidad and Tobago? This is the kind of intervention igds makes, but the gender studies and feminism as a political ideology, looking at what are the gender power relations and power relations on the whole to tell us a little bit more about the truth.
I like the way you were phrasing that when you said, is it? And that's a problem we have, certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, when it comes to how administrations or even society or communities deal with things, we don't necessarily look at actual evidence. We don't try and quantify things to say, okay, this is the extent of the problem, this is what we've identified as the cause of the problem. We think, oh, well, that's happening, therefore we're going to do this.
Yes.
Just a sort of visceral reaction
Yes.
to be seen to do something. That can actually be more destructive, can't it?
Yes, most definitely. For example, Dr. Gabriel Hussain, whom you may know, is doing the IDRC-funded project with the Canadian High Commission on Women in Leadership in English-speaking Caribbean. But look at a trend. Many women, in terms of 50% of electorate in general, in most English-speaking territories, yet there's no 50% of women in the lower house nor the upper house. That the upper house means Senate or ministerial rank. But we have in Guyana, where you have the quota system of 30% to guarantee that women do have representation in Guyana. And they have been going against the grain by ensuring that they have it is not high, it's not acceptable to have 30%. We want more gender parity, but they have much more than countries like Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Dominica, and Jamaica. So that is the kind of work that we do. So for an economist who might be interested in wage income gap, earning income gap, but you may also look at how many women and men participate in the economy, labor participation. Then we look at how many women and men go into senior management and the professional and technical jobs. And then we would have the argument that women advance in higher education. So where are the boys in school? But when we look at deans, pro-vice chancellors, principals, and those who form the academic community in terms of academic administrative staff, we have more men who hold those positions of power. So there's a type of myth of female advancement in higher education.
I want to talk about that, because I've had guests, and I had to keep a civil tongue in my head because I have strong views on the subject, but that doesn't really matter, talking about males are being disempowered in Trinidad and Tobago, and males are being oppressed. I have difficulty swallowing that entire concept. Perhaps you may have some light that you can shed on it, because I don't quite understand how males are being seen to be oppressed in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, well, I ask this question oftentimes. The dominant group. How many times in a political party there's a men's arm and a mature senior person's arm? Why is there a woman's arm and a youth arm, right?
Women's caucus, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What is the body there for? And is the dominant group rendered invisible that they have no need for that advocacy group? I think we do need to attract boys to get into it, but the idea of reforming the entire curriculum to accommodate them, I have some concerns. When women were not in the positions that they are in undergraduate matriculation levels, what was the public anxiety about getting girls into schools? When the global statistics would show girls are underprivileged or don't have the same access to primary school education as young boys may have. But then when looking at boys in education, I think it's a broader issue of the economy. Is it that we privilege formal education as the only way? Or do we create alternative realities or prospects for young boys and young girls to enter? Are we going to try to make an effort to reduce gender streaming that persons do informally in schools to say this subject is for boys, this subject for girls? And where boys dominate in academia as well as also the higher paid jobs in the economy. So we need to have a much more nuanced discussion about males in higher education, it seems, is the biggest issue. How do males perform in university?
Because you'll hear them always pointing the figures. Look, there are more women
Exactly.
enrolled at UE and UTT in certain courses
Exactly.
than men. Isn't that shocking? Even in engineering, isn't that shocking somehow?
And isn't it shocking that all these women who are enrolled are not the lecturers in the classroom?
That is actually an interesting point as well. But
And that's the debate that we have.
as you mentioned, a lot of this comes down to privilege, doesn't it?
Yes, we have a society that privileges men in particular, but people negotiate the power very differently, you know. I mean, so people say, well, a woman have some power. To be very fair, I can't cross without a zebra crossing, right? You know, there wouldn't be an informal catwalk that is created for me to cross the road in peace. But you would say, okay, well, a woman has power to stop a car as she crosses the road. But how is that power in terms of the realm of, for example, public leadership? Men have many examples of public leadership in their life. You could have a big belly, you could be cocky-eyed, but women have ideas about femininity and the way that ideas of beauty, the institution of beauty. There's also an institution of beauty for men, but men have more examples to draw from to assume that role of leadership. And this is what we are here to challenge, the idea of beauty and power. And how beauty is seen as powerful. That is what gender studies would allow one to do. And this is the kind of discussions that we have. That's why we'll have an Obama and a Hillary, or Man and Pandy and a Kamala. How does language now take on a form in a way? Why is it that you have to be a kind of mother figure and the authoritarian leader at the same time? How is that balance?
So how is it even possible?
How was it even possible? Or that if you are angry and a woman, you're the B word. If you're soft.
You're not strong, you're the B word.
Yes,
yeah.
You're not strong and then you're possibly gay, homosexual. So men also suffer under a system that oppresses men. And what we really want is the diversity of human experiences between men and women to make sure that, like little children, we all want to play by the same rules. We want to play fair. As our game at gender studies.
And there are a lot of sort of double standards when it comes to the lines that we draw, aren't there? I mean, I'm thinking, you mentioned Rihanna, for example, and a lot of people will say very cruel things about her depending on what she's wearing.
Yes.
If she's wearing something that's a bit revealing, they'll say things about her. We can have a male performer singing in his jockey shorts, and that's apparently okay. But the minute a woman does, we got, I guess what is called slut shaming, I think is the term that's used internationally for it. And you have things like slut walk, women protesting, this sort of double standard that we have. Is that something that's also present in the Caribbean, that we judge women based on what they're wearing and place sort of labels on them based on that?
Of course. And, in terms of, it's very interesting. In general, male sexuality does not sell. However, male hypersexuality or men as sex symbols is readily received by the public and it's seen as okay, or you're having fun, or boy, this one's so wild, he's just mischief. But in terms of women now creating the spectrum of sexuality, which may be, hypersexual or very conservative or negotiating different phases on the way that they see their image, it creates almost a type of moral anxiety. How a woman, what is vulgar? Why is vulgar used for women and not for men, right? And these are the questions. For example, part of my research, I went into a fete and I'm hearing the photographer telling this young man taking a picture with his sister, well, who I would later find out to be his sister. And he was like, I only take pictures unless you're whining. And then he was like, but that's my sister. He was like, all right, well, that had nothing to do with you. But they would take pictures of only girls in groups or boys dancing on girls. And a kind of male experience that they're creating. That even though women are the largest consumers in carnival fetes, they are also the largest group of people being consumed in the carnival fete at the same time. And that gives us an idea of gender power relations. Very interesting.
And it's sort of symptomatic of something that would lead to those same gender power relations that can result in domestic violence ultimately.
Most definitely, and it's simple things like objectification, women free before 11 and 10 drinks. So you're getting drinks and girls at the same time. And how do we make that shift from a man's bed to a man's world, right? And this is the kind of...
Or even the fact that we can think that's okay in an advertisement.
Of course, and we think it's okay. And it's not about, it's alcohol against people who don't drink alcohol. It's about objectification, not objectifying. It's about how as a society do we manage change? And do we want transformation, our desire for transformation? We are not here to quarrel our position in a system. I'm not here to say, well, if men have it, well, we need to have half for women. Or if women have it, well, we need to get some more men involved. We're here to challenge the entire system itself and the processes to make it meritocratic, to make it fair, and that is how both men and women work for gender justice. We don't seek just gender equality or gender equity, but our narrative that we like to create is gender justice. So on my shirt here, I have Marcus Garvey pin. So I wear Marcus Garvey again in part of my traditions in Rastafari, which I embrace. But Marcus Garvey, I would only have half his story if I don't understand the strength and the valuable contributions of Amy Garvey, who have fundamental ideological differences between him and himself.
And that's okay.
That is okay.
Yeah.
But she made some contributions which may be more useful sometimes to the Pan-African movement. And she made some critiques of Marcus Garvey's philosophies and opinions. But is it that how many persons who know the image of Marcus Garvey know that of Amy Garvey?
There's a general tendency to downplay the importance of women in history.
And
women didn't just weren't sitting demurely in the background through the entire existence of humanity.
Indeed.
But we very seldom hear women's stories.
Indeed, it's the woman's story. We don't even have women's original names by the time they get married sometimes, right? So the idea of women's stories, for example, there's a course that we offer called Introduction to Women's Studies. We have the family history essay, where we look at the story of women in our family and their contributions to the way that they understand how they grew up. The same way for men and masculinities, we have a family history and essay where we understand men. But the interesting thing is, what we would make our intervention is what therefore constitutes the hero. Is it a male leadership standard where it is we need strong aggression and almost a type of violence against the state, which kind of leads to what we have today of violence and public discourse. Why this one and pave my road? Why this one and do that? Let me burn tires and do it now, even though sometimes legitimate anger. Or does advocacy, mobilizing the community, knocking on parliament's doors, writing legislation, or working with communities over time to change attitudes with the same intensity you would seek to change policy or a current government administration constitute a hero. So in terms of what is, this kind of sexy, revolutionary bravado that we value, or are there other heroes who exist, but we have a certain lens which limits our abilities to value what is a leader?
And that diminishes our ability to educate ourselves if we don't expand that lens to include everyone.
Indeed.
And take in all the stories.
Indeed.
There's also, I guess, multiple levels of victimhood, extending, I guess, from the very base level, which would be women being the victims of male violence against them, to even in our society, many people feel disempowered. They feel that the state doesn't care about them, doesn't listen to them, and therefore they are, to some extent, victims of the state.
Yes.
How do we translate that victimhood into something constructive?
Most definitely. What we actually try to do is develop a sense of community. I mean, community, I think, is the only way we could solve our problems. So for example, look at transport in Trinidad and Tobago. The mass of people take public transport, yet the anxiety around election time is around traffic lights, red, yellow, green, dictating how you travel, therefore those who could afford cars, which creates a certain justification and I understand the logic in a $1 billion gas subsidy, right, for private vehicles. But look at the experience of public transport to whom travels in the morning and evenings. And therefore, if women can't go outside freely, as men could, or one has the fear of losing material possessions, and the next one has the fear of losing material possessions like a cell phone and a dignity by rape. That's an unfreedom in the language of Amartya Sen. Do we follow operational health and safety standards in our bus? Do pregnant women have the ability to sit down on our bus comfortably? Informally in Barbados, there's a system where pregnant women, you have to stand up or get out, and a pregnant woman sits. But I saw in Venezuela, we have pregnant women, senior citizens, and children who have a special place to be accommodated in that. That is gender justice, to making sure that you don't just pay for the ride, but you pay for your seat. And that is the kind of dialogue that we want to bring in to understand what are the realities, and understanding how the least of us are treated, we may understand the power relations more, and we understand therefore how to give more justice to the mass of people. But our collective approach is important. Men and women need to be on the same page to get it done. The same way in religion, some people see that as a justification for gender disparities. In fact, I hold another view. It shows the forced complementarity between men and women working together. And yes, different faiths have their debates about the role of men and women in the house and in the public sphere. And there's a debate that we could help facilitate or even sit at, not even facilitate, sit at, to see how we have gender dialogues, but communities need to discuss that together. And the same issues of transparency. Some women, if there are pay disparities, if you have a sister, you want your sister earning less for the same job that you have. You want your daughters, a father, for his daughters to earn less. But you also want boys to feel that education is not valuable. And if they don't have the same esteem or terms of value for formal education, are other jobs devalued in society, which is what women experience. If there was a degree in basket weaving, would basket weaving become important? These are the questions that we have.
It's also, I mean, I don't envy people like you who've made a sort of a life decision to sort of stay in the field of gender and development studies, because it is such a complex field. It's not just about gender, because, I mean, gender intersects with ethnicity, with religion, with age, with economic status, any number of things, and those all sort of form this very convoluted cloud that you have to sort of work your way through to get to the core.
Of course, and that is why the name of our program is Interdisciplinary Studies in Gender and Development. There is no argument that we make without our idea or our mission being transformation for national, regional, and on the whole, global development. At the same time, it is interdisciplinary. So for example, if you study law, or we have budding lawyers, the Shanique Mary versus Barbada case was gendered completely in the media reports about what she wore, how she dressed. It's alleged that she's a prostitute, she's part of a human trafficking ring. And if it is that we lobby for the CCJ, we wouldn't say it's not just the Caribbean Court of Justice, but how do they deal with civil procedures and not just trade disputes? That is gender justice we seek as well. If it is in the case of engineering and architecture, how do you have male and female bathrooms? How many corporate environments don't have female bathrooms available on the highest floor? Because the assumption is that men only govern that space. If we look at, so we have engineering, we have law, we look at the media a little bit, we look at carnival and society in terms of creative industries and entrepreneurship. And if it is that we privilege certain corporate entities, which are oftentimes male-dominated, what about the cultural politics of local enterprise, which a lot of women lead in that industry? How is entrepreneurship framed? Does the CSME only benefit corporate groups moving into other territories under its ordinance or principles? And if it denies free movement of people and women form the highest group of soul traders, is female business now being marginalized? But men, if we live in a homophobic environment, there's nothing sexy about a pap smear. But why it is that we don't do our tests for prostate cancer?
When we have a very high incidence in the Caribbean.
It's only number one killers. And these are the health issues that we have to face and confront, and the opportunities that we have as human beings. And that is why we seek gender justice. It is interdisciplinary. They're across all fields. It's in education, it's in linguistics, we're in sociology, we're in literature. And that is what we're trying to get across to the public. And we want to be engaged the same way we want to engage others.
It's still mind-boggling to me how you keep track of all those things. I guess you've probably figured out some way of doing it. I have to ask, I mean, why would you, for example, have chosen to go into this field? I mean, you would think, you don't normally think men, because of built-in prejudice, we don't think of men going into gender studies as often, although the fact is that a lot of men do go into gender studies. Yes. Why would you have chosen it as an area of interest?
I went into gender studies. Thank you very much for that invitation. I guess this is a reflection I must have, you know. I was part of the hyper-masculine males, you know. I went to all-boys school for a point of time in my life. I was in a popular group. I played cricket. No, I could even see my cricket bat may have been a phallic symbol, you know, between my legs, you know. I saw many young boys when we bought our cars, you know, how we would feel much stronger as men. But then I saw the excesses, you know, what was boys play and fun. I saw incidents of violence, which were not dealt with at that point in time. I sat in a maxi and I saw two young primary school children sit down, and the maxi man made his friend take up the seat, and they paid for 2 seats. And she was like, no, but this is my younger brother. But because of their size, because of their age, it's a part of ageism as well. They said, no, you're small, you could fit on 1 seat. And they paid for 2 seats. And I see injustice everywhere when I see old grannies coming back from church. The majority of church persons who attend church are women, you know, walking on our hardly paved roads, but uneven pavements on the Eastern Main Road. I say, well, something is wrong here. And when I look at the incidents of rape that exists, and also men who suffer from rape and violence, especially as young boys, I said, well, something is wrong is happening, you know, something is strange here. And as a man, I said that, yes, I'm looking at class. Yes, I want to dissolve, right, racial prejudice. Yes, I want to crack down elitism, which sees the poor as, you know, a group that could be walked over, or that there's dispossession in our society. But until I understand the gender realities, I may be speaking to more people. And it's an issue about consumer rights as well, you know, the way that we buy products and information and what we have access to. So this is a broad drive for justice. My first love is for justice. And as Dr. Colin West would say, justice is what love looks like in public. And it's for love. My mother raised me to love. And my father gave me ideas, and my mother gave me love. And that is how I came to gender studies. And that's why I study soca fets. You know, it's very
Because
fun.
I guess no other department really could absorb all the questions that you were asking and help answer them.
And
it is so broad.
And they should. You know, there wouldn't be a need for gender studies if this analysis was there in every faculty. If this analysis was there, I find it ironic that I do introduction to sociology or classical sociological thought. These are courses. And we have one topic on feminism. Or we have in history, there's a topic called women in history. So what have we been studying the entire time?
So there's history and there's women in history.
Women in history.
Right, okay.
What have we been studying the entire time? I would love to live in a world where gender was part of the analysis and I was seen as normal and natural. But for some reason it is not. And I find that very interesting. But until that time, we will keep our work to make sure we interrogate all matters that exist, to make sure both men and women could benefit in our society.
We only have about 2 minutes left, but I have to ask you, a lot of people perceive institutes like the IGDS as being purely academic and having no real manifest use in the real world. That isn't the case. I mean, you do try and make the studies that you do useful to the larger community.
Indeed. We have feminist research and action in the Caribbean, like CAFRA, and Professor Reddock, our deputy principal, has helped part in steering that. The work with the Rape Crisis Society is very important, and they don't just give justice to victims of rape, but even the victimizer to try to work on them. Actually, oftentimes men. The reality is that women are more likely to be attacked by a stranger, by persons they know, intimate partners, the boyfriends, and it's seen as normal abuse. They don't talk about it or report it. And men are more likely to be attacked by strangers. We work with Carima, the Caribbean Male Action Network. We work with NUDE, the National Union of Domestic Employees, where a lot of women work as domestic servants as well, and in the, what we call the informal economy. So we work with NGO groups and do outreach into schools and have what we call lunchtime seminars and public dialogues where we engage stakeholders across fields to be part of it. And that's our activist work, and we have a YouTube channel so you could readily access our
Big
work.
plug for the YouTube channel.
Yes,
there.
the
Well,
YouTube
Amilcar,
channel.
we're completely out of time. It's been a great pleasure having you on the program. I want to thank you so much for making the effort
Thank you
to
very
come
much,
on.
Mr. Ramasa.
Vernon, please. Thank you very much. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.